Welcome to the Seahawkers Podcast. Top 15 former Seahawks every fan should know. With your hosts, Adam Emmert,
Largent, Walter Jones, Cortez Kennedy. Just do a quick Google and you'll figure it out right quick.
and Brandon Schultz.
If they played for Pete Carroll, we're leaving them off. You guys should already know those guys.
With guest host Mark Ty Turner. Number 1, strong safety Kenny Easley.
Welcome to the Seahawkers Podcast. Top 15 former Seahawks every fan should know. I'm Brandon Schultz. Joining me, my good buddy Adam Emmert.
Going with number 1 today, folks. Number 1.
We made it to number 1.
Yeah, and I think a fitting player for it. A very accomplished man and probably a guy who could have played anytime, anywhere. Just have the field out there, and he's ready to roll.
Indeed. And when we started this, we said we weren't going to talk about any Seahawks players who are already in the Hall of Fame. A lot of people view this guy as someone who should be in the Hall of Fame. Number 1, safety Kenny Easley. And joining us to talk about it, Mark Ty Turner.
Hey, guys. How's it going up there?
You know, we got in a little bit of trouble, Mark, because we talked about some guys like Dave Brown, Jim Zorn, who we weren't too familiar with because we didn't really we hadn't had that experience of watching them game to game, week to week in the early days of the Seahawks. And for the number 1 guy, for Kenny Easley, we got to bring back the author of Notes from a 12th Man, a truly biased history of the Seattle Seahawks. You have all the accounts of some of the biggest games Kenny Easley played in and know exactly what type of player he was.
Yeah, and count me as one of the guys that totally thinks Kenny Easley needs to be in the Hall of Fame. It's really sad and kind of inexplicable that he's not. And I think maybe because he played in Seattle and his career ended early, that's why. But ask none other than Ronnie Lott, who is always pushed as Kenny Easley says, because Ronnie and Kenny are around the same period, and Ronnie Lott is considered like maybe the best safety in the 80s. And Kenny Easley, he always said Kenny Easley was on his level. I don't know how or why Kenny Easley, other than the fact that he didn't play long enough and he played in Seattle. That's the only reasons I can see why Kenny Easley is not in the Hall of Fame, and he should be.
Yeah, Ronnie Lott brought it up here recently when talking about Cam Chancellor, actually, and kind of getting Ronnie Lott's opinion to Chancellor, said Cam Chancellor right now is as good as any safety that's played the game of football. He said, it's hard for me to say this, but there was only one guy that I know that's better, and that's Kenny Easley. He was Defensive Player of the Year and best player to play the safety position ever. He's getting close to being in the community of greatness, he said about Cam, and that's hard for him to say because he just had the utmost respect for Easley, and so he's comparing these two guys. And then the reporter brought up the fact that Ronnie Lott was pretty good at the position too. But and then Lott said, I would tell you I look up to Kenny. When I look at Kenny and I look at myself, the only thing that separates us is that Kenny didn't get a chance to do it as long. That's the only thing.
Yeah. And it's a good. I've always compared Cam with Easley as well too. Not only that they're hard hitting safeties, but they're also from the same state. They're both from Virginia. So it's kind of maybe Virginia just gives us really hard hitting safeties for the Seahawks. That's how it's produced there.
Well, and they kind of both carry that same moniker, right? Kenny Easley, he's the one he was the enforcer, and you see Cam kind of starting to adopt that name for himself too. You go on Twitter and on his Twitter handle or in his name has the enforcer. So
yeah. Well, and Kenny Easley always said, like, he goes, I'm vicious. I mean, he would say that in interviews, like, I'm vicious. He's not out to hurt people, but he wants the offensive players, the receivers or whoever he's hitting, he wants them to feel it. And he did. And of course, the rules were a lot different back then. So some of the stuff he did back in the 80s would probably be flagged today, no question. But I tell you, a lot of wide receivers would not go across the middle when Kenny was there.
Well, and so that's, we have the Legion of Boom now. Now, how did Kenny Easley and the players in that secondary at the time when he was playing, how do you kind of compare those two squads?
Oh, I mean, we had a great defensive, a great backfield back then too. I mean, we had Kenny and we had Dave Brown. I mean, it was a great group of players, and I really loved those guys back then, and they were like. I mean, like in '84 was like such an amazing team there. I mean, we had John Harris and Keith Simpson were the other players in the backfield. You know, they didn't get the press of the Legion of Boom. They didn't have a nickname like the Legion of Boom. It was a different era as well. But that was a great defensive group back then. And one game in particular, and we could talk more about it because the 84 season is really the defining season in Kenny Easley's career. I mean, the guy had a great career here. He was a 5-time Pro Bowler, 3-team All-Pro, but 84 was the year he won the NFL Defensive Player of the Year.
He was double-digit in interceptions that year with 10. Yeah,
he led the league in interceptions, which is hard, not really easy for safeties to do necessarily.
Right.
Not a lot of So that especially that period, that was like considered like really unusual, and not a lot of safeties become Defensive Player of the Year either. So that was
not a lot of safeties make the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate too. But there's one game in particular in the 84 season that really kind of stands out. Well, there's a few, I should say. I mean, there's a couple. One was at this Monday Night Football game where we played the Chargers and we shut out the Chargers down in San Diego. And Kenny had 3 interceptions in that game. And he basically just took control of the whole game and just broke the will of Dan Fouts and the Chargers. It was just an amazing game. But then later in the year, we played the Chiefs up in the Kingdom.
Yeah, we actually talked about this game in our episode on Dave Brown, because Brown had 2 interceptions in this game, but Easley had one of his own.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the team overall had 4 interceptions returned for touchdowns.
Yep, NFL record.
Yeah, and that's an NFL record to this day. I mean, it's funny that at the time we thought this is a big deal, but we didn't think about it in terms of like
you don't think a record like that is going to stick around for 30 years.
Yeah. I mean, you just because you didn't really. I had no frame of reference before that. I think the record before that was like 2 or 3, or it might have been 3 or something like that, which was years before. And I'm like, oh, this is great. We're going to have it. I didn't think that 30 years later that nobody would even have no team has even tied that record.
Right.
It's one of those NFL records the Seahawks have. They don't have a lot of these like super big records there like that, but or game records like that. But that's one of them. And it was such an amazing game. It was goofy. It was almost like the way they were just beating up on the Chiefs all day long. I mean, 45-0 was the final. It was a lot of fun. I just love that game.
Well, it was a stretch of games, too, where you mentioned the San Diego game where he had the 3 picks off Dan Fouts, and then the next game was that 4-interception game against the Chiefs. And then the very next week against the Raiders, he had 2 more.
Yeah. And we went on a stretch there where we only gave up like a 4-game stretch where we gave up 2 touchdowns in 4 games.
Yeah, 20 points over those 4 games.
And that was we had 3 shutouts that season. And as we know these days, how rare shutouts are.
Oh yeah.
If you get 1 in a season, that's a big deal. To get 3, it was huge. So, and that was such a fun team to watch. And we were like they set a record for most turnovers that season. And, it was a lot of fun to watch. And that was the season that Kurt Warner went down in the first game. So we went to more of an Air Knox sort of, it went from ground chuck to Air Knox that season. And Dave Craig had his best passing season that year.
Now, what happened toward the end of that season, Mark? Because, you talk about how dominant the defense was, but then toward the end of the year, they give up, over 30 points to Kansas City on the road. Then they lose to Denver, where Denver scores more than 30 points in the Kingdome. Were they just coasting at that point into the playoffs? Because they seemed to get it back against the Raiders that first game. We talked about how Jacob Green had such a dominant performance in that 84 game against the Raiders, but then go on to lose in Miami in the a year after winning in Miami when they were supposed to lose.
Yeah. It was a little payback there for the Dolphins that year. But you're right. Yeah, I mean, we're getting blown out by the Chiefs. I mean, Arrowhead Stadium has always been a nightmare for us. I mean, the Chiefs could be a horrible team, and they were an average team that year. I think they finished 8-8 or something like that. But we got blown out like we lost there, like we always do in Arrowhead. And then that game, I much more remember that game against the Broncos because that was a Saturday afternoon game, and that was both teams came in with 12-3 records, and it was for the AFC Western Division Championship. Mm-hmm. And we had never won the division at that point. So at that point, it was probably the biggest game in team history because it was a chance to win the division at home in front of our own folks at the Kingdom. and it was just Elway's best performance ever in Seattle. And it just was crushing. It was horrible.
Sorry to bring up the bad memories.
Yeah, that game is a bad memory for me. It's just, and it was Elway too. And Elway's just he's the thorn in the Seahawks side in some ways too, because the fact is, here's a guy who is a Washingtonian. I mean, he was born in the state, grew up in California, but he still is a Washingtonian, and I don't think anybody has more passing yards and more passing touchdowns against the Seahawks than John Elway. But normally we had the better of him in Seattle, but that was one game where we didn't. And it cost us the division championship.
Well, one thing I wanted to talk about with Easley and bring up is that he kind of, in a way, he was the original real Mike Robb. Mike Robinson taking us fans behind the scenes, showing us the videos, and Easley did this too. Mina Kimes wrote a story in, she's ESPN senior writer, Mina Kimes. She's a Seahawks fan. You maybe have heard her if you listen to the Reel and the Field Goals podcast. They have her on quite a bit. And she did a story talking about how Kenny Easley started up his own newspaper called Inside the Seahawks. Fans might remember Norm Evans. He did a newsletter called The Seahawk Report. And when Mina talks about how when Norm interviewed Kenny Easley, he thought that was kind of a good idea and decided to start up this Inside the Seahawks, and over a number of years continued to put it out, kind of giving people some of that perspective from inside the locker room that maybe you wouldn't otherwise get.
Yeah, kind of a thing that is almost kind of quaint these days, the term newsletter.
Right.
Everything's a blogs now. No, there weren't but back then there was news.
Well, it's so much easier now that you can just, if you want to show people things, you just turn on your phone and you can have video up on the web in no time at all. It actually took some effort back in the day.
Oh yeah, it was no social media, no internet, nothing like that. I mean, it's very quaint in some ways there. In most ways, the social media sometimes can get a little tricky there especially with some players saying stupid things on there, but man, the things at your fingertip, and to me, being a Seahawk fan in LA, I love it because I can stay, current with what's going on with the Seahawks at all times. It's crazy. Yeah. Like I said, like there's news reports that are just downloaded immediately on there, and you can see what's going on their OTAs and their mini camps and stuff like immediately, where it used to be like maybe a blurb or something before. Now it's all out there instantaneous.
Well, we talked about how great Easley was in 1984, a big year for the Seahawks defense. He was selected again to go to the Pro Bowl in 1985. Then he got injured in 86. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of the start of maybe the downturn of his career. Yeah.
I mean, it was brutal. I mean, I remember in 86 when he got hurt, and we had kind of gone on this little bit of a slide. I think it was like he played it till 10 games. And then he got hurt, and we're thinking, okay, well, there's the season. But then we ended up having a great run at the end of the year there, winning our last 5 in a row. We were 5-6, and we ended up going 10-6, but without Easley, which was kind of surprising to me. But yeah, it was. I don't know if he ever got completely healthy after that. He had a decent year in 87. He went back, he made the Pro Bowl again. He definitely was not as good as he was before he got injured. That's for sure.
It's interesting that him being the player rep at the time and then not too long after being shipped off for the first round pick, Kelly Stouffer.
Yeah. I mean, maybe they thought that, Easley was never going to be quite the player here and that they really wanted to look for a quarterback in the future. It always seemed like they were doing that. Poor Dave Craig had to deal with this the whole time. As well as he played, they always were kind of looking for somebody else in there. Be it, Warren Moon back in 84, which they didn't get. And then but then they had, Gail Gilbert out of Cal.
Oh,
yeah. In 86, Craig got benched for a while, and they brought in Gail Gilbert to play for him there. And then they went back to Craig. So it always seemed like they were trying to find somebody else to replace Craig. And that was the Kelly Stouffer issue there. And then that was, of course, was a disaster.
That'd be a good podcast name, the Kelly Stouffer issue. I don't know. It just has a ring to it,
Yeah. So I don't know if that had much to do with it, or if they just thought he had enough time there. It's hard to say, but that trade turned out to be, and we've talked about it on another podcast, there's that trade to the Cardinals turned out to save Kenny Easley's life because he gets traded to the Cardinals for their number one pick. He takes his physical down there. He fails it, and they go and they discover that he has some serious kidney issues. And so he had to immediately retire. And it turned out later it was the effect of taking a lot of ibuprofen and that the team doctors gave him, and there was a lot of friction, and it caused actually Kenny Easley to kind of distance himself from the Seahawks for like 15 years.
Well, there was a lawsuit at the time because, you know, the doctor said that they didn't tell him to take that much ibuprofen, and Easley said that they did. So it was kind of a contentious case, and like you said, they kind of cut his ties with the Seahawks for a while until kind of in recent years, it seems like, and kind of his Ring of Honor induction, it helped kind of mend those the relationships.
Yeah. And what I've heard is from a lot of people is this. One woman who's been working for the Seahawks forever, Sandy Gregory, was a very key person that she knew Kenny, and she was able to kind of bring him back into the Seahawk family. So that was very cool that she was able to do that there. And I've not spoken to Kenny about this, but I've spoken to Kenny's wife at the time, and she credited Sandy Gregory as the one that brought Kenny back into the Seahawk family. So I'm glad he's back in there. I'm glad he got to go and get inducted into the Ring of Honor, and also he's been able to wave the 12-man flag and be a little bit more part of the team. It's great. I'm glad, you know, a lot of that is Paul Allen too, wanting to bring back the old players and keep it as this, it's the family, but it's also known as the Seahawk alumni, where they promote all of their former players' charities and everything like that. I think it's a great thing. And I'm glad that Kenny's back into it, because it was always just kind of a sour taste when he didn't want to have anything to do with the Seahawks and was suing them and everything like that. It's not, you know, it's a reality, but it's not one that we want. And especially of a great player like Kenny Easley.
Well, especially when, so many fans have such great memories about a guy like Easley and what he meant to the Seahawks at the time. I mean, 32 interceptions in his 7-year career, 538 yards off those, 3 touchdowns, and Dave Brown had the 5 touchdown returns. But just part of that defense, like you talked about, especially in 1984. I mean, heck, even Easley was even a punt returner, and Adam cringes about how Earl Thomas was allowed to return punts. I can't even imagine what he would have been like if Easley had been returning punts.
Catatonic. I wouldn't have been able to handle it.
Yeah, well, that's a great story of what happened is that back in '84, our regular punt returner, Paul Johns, who was a great punt returner for us there, in this game against the Bears, he got hurt, and it ended up being his last game he ever played with us. And he's sadly another player that his career ended way too early. But when he went down, Kenny Easley went to Chuck Knox and said, "Hey, I'll go return punts." And Chuck had said that was the first time in his whole NFL career that a starter had ever come to him and said, I'll return punts. He had never seen that before, that somebody volunteered. Mind you, this is the guy that year was the NFL Player of the Year, Defensive Player of the Year. He's offering, and as we know, it's a headhunter position, is your fair game on players there. And so he went and did it. That was really impressive. He didn't do that many punt returns that season. I mean, they ended up getting somebody else later on because they were going, we don't want to risk him too much on that. But the fact that he even volunteered and did it for a few games was pretty impressive. So I have lots of respect for Kenny for doing that. I mean, that's a guy that really, put the team above himself. And that's what you always appreciate with players doing that. So that's a great story with Kenny. I love that.
Well, and a great player to end on number 1 of our list of top 15 former Seahawks every fan should know. Kenny Easley, a 3-time All-Pro, 83, 84, and 85. Went to the Pro Bowl in 5 straight seasons. Not 5 straight. Went to the Pro Bowl in 5 seasons. Only missed that 1986 season. And one more thing before we wrap up on Kenny Easley, Adam. I got an email here from Gary from Chappaqua, New York. Says, I just remember having the Enforcer poster on my bedroom wall with the Easley Street sign on it. As much as Dave Brown might be the original Hawk and the grandfather of the Legion of Boom, I never really got to watch him play much. Kenny would have fit in so well with this group. He was a tone setter on defense. I rock my Easley jersey regularly these days and have to introduce people in New York to what I consider the original Legion of Boom member.
No, it's kind of a generational thing, right? The poster.
Yeah.
Like I don't know that I've seen one kid with a poster. Like I haven't seen one kid looking through the poster rack or like going to the counter to buy a poster, whether it's bands or football or whatever. You know what I mean?
It doesn't. It definitely doesn't seem to be as popular as it was when we were kids, right?
Yeah, man, that was a thing back in the day. Like I'm looking at the Largent Blue Angel poster right now here in the podcast.
Yeah, and it feels right.
It does feel right, and yeah, it was such a phenomenon, and it was always the great players, right, that had their own poster, and it was usually pretty. They were usually pretty dope. So I appreciate Gary bringing that up, and to kind of also tie it into today's Seahawks crew and how he would have fit in.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. And as we wrap up our top 15 series, I want to give one last thank you to Mark Ty Turner, who joined us for 4 of our 15 shows to kind of give us some of that old school Seahawks history that he writes about in Notes from a 12th Man, a truly biased history of the Seattle Seahawks, available on Amazon. You can get it at any bookstore. I have it on my Kindle and look to it anytime I want to get some of that Seahawks history.
Oh, you bet, man. It's like a Seahawks encyclopedia, basically. It's great. So definitely go check that out. Get it bought. You won't be sad.
And then his other book, Seattle Seahawks Super Season, Notes from a 12 on the best season in Seahawks history. If you want to relive that Super Bowl season with the Seahawks,
every day, man.
Mark has another book there too.
Yeah, every day I want to relive that season, man. Every day.
Check it out on Amazon, and I'm sure we'll have Mark Ty Turner back on the show to talk about more Seahawks this upcoming season. Once again, thanks, Mark. Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.